Analyst at WUSC with the Ignite project. First, I want to say thanks so much for joining us on the project as a partner organization. This video is about 60 minutes long, and it'll provide you with just a bit of an orientation or overview of the Ignite project. We've divided it into chunks, so you can feel free to watch a little bit at a time or watch the entire video. Thanks so much, and I hope you enjoy. All right, so before we get started today, I want to thank you for taking the time to review this overview introductory module to the Ignite project. As a project partner, it's very important to us that all partner staff are given every opportunity to understand the project's big picture, such that we can optimize your time with the project and that we can achieve more results together for the youth and women that your organization serves. So please do feel free to share this video series with any of your staff who will be working with Ignite staff or volunteers over the next few years. So Ignite stands for Innovative Global Networks for Inclusion and Equality. Ignite is a volunteer cooperation project funded by Global Affairs Canada, or GAC for short. The Volunteer Cooperation Program, or VCP, contributes to GAC's global development mission to reduce poverty in developing countries through partnership. Through funding provided to Canadian organizations that use volunteerism as a key mechanism, which are known as Volunteer Cooperation Agencies, or VCAs, the Canadian government provides Canadians with an opportunity to contribute to global development efforts in a sustainable way through partner organizations like yourselves that are already targeting youth, particularly young women. For more than 50 years, the VCP has engaged a broad range of Canadians interested in giving their time and using their skills and expertise to support local organizations to strengthen their capacities and performance. The current cycle of the VCP runs from 2020 to 2027, and 12 projects are currently being implemented by various Canadian NGOs. WUSC's Ignite project is one of these initiatives. So the complete session is about 60 minutes long, but we've broken it up into several parts so that you can watch it all at once or in small sessions if you'd like. We'll start with an overview of WUSC's Ignite project so that you can situate yourself and your organization in the project. And then the next 3 sections will be brief overviews of some of the key frameworks that ground our work. So one is results-based management, or RBM. The second one is the Feminist International Assistance Policy, or the FIAP. And the third is environmental sustainability and climate action as it relates to the Ignite project. And then the last section will do a bit of a deep dive using those frameworks into the project's theory of change, including an overview of our logic model and a brief introduction to our PMF, or the Performance Measurement Framework. So you can watch it all in sequence, or as I said, you can break it up into chunks if you need to, and then at the end, if you still have questions, you can reach out to the WUSC staff in your country, and they can follow up and help you with any more answers that you need. Let's start by talking about a bit of the rationale behind the Ignite project and why WUSC and partners like yourself want to contribute to improving the social and economic well-being of youth, particularly young women. Young people experience different challenges and have different opportunities depending on factors like sex, age, ability, refugee status, ethnicity, religion, gender identity and expression, sexual orientation, and other identity factors. People's attitudes towards these factors and the way that they intersect often result in further exclusion, inequality, and vulnerability. Globally, young women are particularly marginalized, and in addition to age-based discrimination, they also confront systematic gender-based discrimination and violence. Young people, particularly young women, are more likely to be unemployed than adults, with the global youth unemployment rate being 3 times higher than the adult rate. Across most labor market indicators, wide disparities exist between young women and young men, underpinning and giving rise to wider gaps during the transition to adulthood. For example, globally, the labor force participation rate for young men stands at 54%, compared to only 37% for young women. There's a growing body of evidence that suggests that specialized employment and entrepreneurship programs do work, especially when they're targeted at marginalized youth and when they combine training with other types of project support. Given this background, WUSC's Ignite project aims to respond to these challenges by supporting more than 70 partners over 7 years to improve their performance in delivering inclusive and innovative programming that advances gender equality. So through improved performance of local partner organizations like your organization to deliver inclusive, innovative, and environmentally sustainable programs for vulnerable youth that advance gender equality, and with the support of international volunteers, the aim of the project, what we call the ultimate outcome, is to improve the social and economic well-being of poor and marginalized youth, particularly young women. The duration of the Ignite project is 7 years. It runs from 2020 to 2027 and is currently in operation in 6 countries, with plans to expand to 2 additional countries in the coming years. We will work with and through over 70 partner organizations during that time to reach an estimated 1.2 million youth, 70% of whom will be young women. WUSC set out to partner with a portfolio of partners in each country who are key stakeholders in the employment and self-employment ecosystem, what we call the economic opportunities ecosystem in each project country. We considered the journey that vulnerable youth, particularly young women, make throughout their lives as they leave school and develop their livelihoods, and all of the various sectors who do and can support them on this journey, as well as the regulations that influence this journey positively and negatively, and also the barriers that they may face along the way. Then we selected partners who see themselves as part of the solution, like your organization. We involved service delivery organizations, employers, government departments, women's rights organizations, civil society organizations and NGOs, training institutions, incubators, accelerators, among many others. In some countries, the project is also partnering with organizations that target youth and young women who have what we call compounding vulnerabilities, such as forcibly displaced youth, women or youth who migrate for livelihood opportunities, and youth impacted by climate change. Each country also has a PAC, what we call a Program Advisory Committee, which involves not only all partners, but also engages other key actors who can help ensure that the program is relevant, sustainable, and well situated with national efforts to improve economic opportunities for youth, particularly young women. Through platforms like the PAC, WUSC is also trying to foster collaboration and strengthen relationships between partners to contribute to system-level changes. So in order to understand how WUSC plans and implements projects, including our planning logic and our assumptions, I'd like to do a quick review of an approach called results-based management, or RBM. If you're working for an NGO or a civil society organization, chances are you've used RBM before, so in that case you might want to skip through this section if you're already familiar with the approach. But if this approach is new to you, I encourage you to view these slides, and we'll come back to them at the end and frame the project using RBM. So for those of you who have not used RBM previously, I will show you how this approach frames both our project design through tools like the logic model and the performance measurement framework, and also our implementation of the project and how we monitor the project's results. This will be just a very quick overview, and chances are we will be doing some additional training on results-based management through the life of the project, and certainly you'll receive support from the country team and also volunteers where you need it. I would also suggest that you review GAC's results-based management guide. You can contact the WUSC country office to get a copy. And you could also do a quick Google search of results-based management training. There's some pretty good videos and materials out there if this is something that's of interest to you. Before approaches like RBM were common, projects would often just measure up to the activity level or output level. For example, they would report that we did this training for this many people, or we built a school, or we created a curriculum, etc., just at activity level. And they would go for years not measuring the impacts of those activities. So what happened after the school was built? Or what happened after the training took place? Did people use the training? Did they implement the training? And what results did that have? So by impacts, I mean things like the changes that occurred as a result of that change in knowledge, for example, through the training. Another example is if you go through a training program and you can measure the level of knowledge that you gained, right? So let's say you take a course in project management. At the end, you would go for an assessment, and that assessment would tell you, how much knowledge you've gained based on how many questions you can answer correctly in the assessment. But you can also, over time, measure what you did with that knowledge. Did that knowledge change your performance at work or your performance at school? Did it influence a change in your behavior? And ultimately, did that change in behavior result in a change in your conditions or your state? So for example, did you gain employment? Did your employment level change? Did you get a raise? Did you get a promotion? Did your quality of life improve, etc.? So results-based management is really about measuring the raison d'etre, or the purpose of the program. Ultimately, you want to know if the project is having an impact, and you want to measure this throughout the life of the project. All right, so to me, the best way to learn about results-based management, or at least have a summary of results-based management, is to do that visually. So this slide, although it might look a little bit complex and maybe a bit intimidating if you haven't studied results-based management before, I promise you that once you understand it, you will use this tool in the future. I still keep a copy of this by my desk, and I've been working in results-based management for many years. I find it really useful at reporting time, but also when we're working on planning. So in proposal writing and also even in annual planning for projects, because it really helps you think through the logic of your theory, and also the the if-then logic, if you will. We'll talk a lot about if-then logic today. So if we do this, this, and this, then we anticipate this will be the result, this will be the outcome. And if this outcome, this outcome, and this outcome are achieved, then we expect to see this change in behavior. And if this and this change in behavior occur, then we expect we'll be able to contribute to, for example, up at the ultimate outcome level, a change in state or a change in well-being. So we're going to explain this box by box and go through each element, but I also think it's important to look at this slide in really two components. So two components to the logic of the project. The bottom three boxes, inputs, activities, and outputs, are about implementation. They're about what we do as a project. This is what we put into the project. These are our inputs. These are the activities that we conduct. These are the products and services that are delivered as a result of those activities. And it's again, like I said, it's really about what we do. It's about how we implement the project. And then the upper three boxes are what we anticipate will be the changes, what changes will take place. We use the word outcome and result interchangeably, but what's key there is that, when we're looking at outputs, a workshop facilitated, that's not actually a result, right? It is a product or a service that has been achieved because of an activity. Okay, so it's not actually a result. Results are changes that take place, not things that we do as a project. So let's go through this box by box, and I think you'll have an easier time understanding. Please feel free at any time to pause and open this document up if you've got it from your materials that were shared in your packages, and take a closer look. There's also a lot of information on results-based management out there. So if you just search RBM and Global Affairs Canada, or GAC, you should be able to find a manual that was written on results-based management. So if it is something you're really interested in, I encourage you to go out and search for that information. Okay, so let's go box by box. So let's start down at the bottom with inputs. Inputs are resources that are invested by the donor or by the implementing partners. So this is things like money, staff, time, materials, equipment, technology, and even to some extent the partners themselves. The next level up is basically what we turn the inputs into. So we convert the inputs into activities. And activities are actions taken or work performed through which the inputs, as I said, are mobilized. So an example of this might be, so with the time and effort of staff and volunteers and some funding that was put into the activity, we produced a training manual, for example. So that would be an activity. The output of that activity might be that a workshop was facilitated or a training was provided, and basically this is a direct product or service that stems from the activities that we have implemented. So that training has taken place, or the research was undertaken, or an assessment was conducted, etc. So these are products and services delivered by the project. After that, so the upper levels, as I said, are the changes that take place based on everything that was done down below. Okay, so we're implementing the project over 7 years. We'll continue to measure all of the things that we do and how we do them and how many people attend, etc. So those bottom 3 boxes, we do measure all of those things. We measure how much funding goes in, the effort and the time that goes in, and then the activities that take place, and then the products or services. So we measure all of that. Again, it's results-based management. So we're measuring all 3 of those elements. And then we're also going to measure the results. So based on those products and services that were delivered, which were delivered based on the activities and the inputs that we put into the project, these are the anticipated results or the anticipated changes. And there's 3 levels of those changes. So the first level is immediate outcomes. And immediate outcomes represent a change that is expected to occur when we've accomplished or achieved one or more of the outputs delivered by the implementer. So in terms of a time frame and level, these are short-term outcomes and are usually changes in capacity. So for example, an increase in knowledge or an increase in skills or a change in attitude or a change in willingness. They don't represent action level change. That's one level up, that's intermediate. But they do represent that immediate change that can occur after an activity and output are completed. So for example, after a training workshop has been facilitated, we can measure the knowledge change by doing a pre and post test. So we can measure that 90% of participants had an increase in knowledge, and this was the level. So we can measure that immediate change in capacities among the partners. The next level up is intermediate change, and this is a change that is expected to logically occur once one or more of the immediate outcomes have been achieved. So in terms of time frame and level, these are medium-term outcomes that are usually achieved by the end of the project. And they're usually changes that occur in behavior, practice, or performance. So they represent that action level change. So with the knowledge that I have gained through the training, I make an action to change a behavior or a performance. So this would be things like, again, a change in practice, a change in the way that we do things, a change in efficiency, effectiveness, the way that we do things, a change in behavior, a change in policy, social action, decision making, a new way of doing programming, or even just developing a new program might be considered an intermediate outcome. For the Ignite project, the behavior change that we're focusing on is an increase in performance of partner organizations to be able to implement their program from a gender responsive perspective. So that's really the high level change that we expect to achieve. The next level up is the ultimate outcome, and this is a change that we contribute to through the life of the project. So this isn't necessarily a change that we can achieve alone as a project, but it is a change that through our partners we can contribute to. So this is a change in state, conditions, or well-being of the ultimate beneficiaries of the project. So in this case, the youth, in the case of Ignite. So here we're talking about changes in quality of life, changes in safety, in health, in freedom, in living conditions, well-being. Again, in the case of Ignite, we're working towards a change in social and economic well-being of youth, and particularly women. So that's a very high level change that has many contributing factors, including the performance of our partners. So we know that that isn't, again, change that we would have be the sole implementers for. For example, the change wouldn't take place simply because of our project. There's lots of contributing factors, but we are a contributor, and the partners are a contributor into that change of state. So I hope that helps to really look at an overview of results-based management, and we're going to look a little bit closer now at our logic model and how it's framed with these elements. But before we do that, I just want to frame this with a set of questions that I think will help a little bit to crystallize this for you. So again, with the first three levels, we're talking about implementation. So a key question here would be, how will implementers work to achieve the changes or outcomes that we have planned in the project? So again, this is about how we do things and what we do for those first three levels. For immediate outcomes, we would ask ourselves, what changes in capacity will partners experience as a result of participating in the Ignite project and receiving the products and services that are delivered by staff and volunteers? So what are those changes in capacities? And a planning question for the intermediate outcome would be, what changes in behavior or practice or performance do we expect that partners will achieve based on an increase in knowledge, skills, awareness, willingness, those immediate level outcomes? And then finally, the ultimate outcome really asks the question, why are we doing this? What changes in state or conditions or well-being will youth and women experience as a result of the changes that take place with our partner organization, those high-level intermediate outcomes? So I think that gives a pretty good overview. And in the next slide, we're going to look at the logic horizontally, just to give a bit of a different perspective and help crystallize results-based management for you. Okay, so using the layout from the previous slide, you can see that we normally create logic models vertically. So you saw that graphic, my favorite graphic, which had inputs at the bottom and the ultimate outcome at the top. So inputs are able to help us create activities. Resulting from those activities are the outputs, which result in immediate outcomes, so changes in capacities, which can influence changes in behavior, which can contribute to the ultimate outcome, which is the change in state. So this is just another way of looking at it. So framed by the rationale of a project, taking into account the assumptions. We have, again, the inputs, activities, outputs, and ultimate outcome. This may help to make the point a little bit clearer for those that have not done results or used results-based management before. So think of a logic model as a theorized description of a chain of cause and effects that lead to a desired outcome. So we use it as a plan, right? As a plan, but we try to make that plan as informed as possible. So we create the rationale, we think about what the assumptions are that went into the plan. We outline what the inputs are, what we anticipate the activities will be, and the outputs of those activities. And, with as much evidence as we can gather, we plan what we think the desired outcomes and intermediate, and ultimate outcomes would be. So logic models really form a graphic description of, or depiction rather, of the if-then relationships. And as we saw in the previous slide, you can obviously do that vertically, but you can think about it horizontally as well. So this slide shows another way of looking at the logic, and again puts some importance on the rationale and the assumptions. So let's think about the rationale for Ignite. Our rationale is that through the improved performance of partners, which are of course our service delivery organizations, employers, government bodies, and advocacy groups, for example, a higher performing and more inclusive ecosystem of stakeholders and engagement of Canadian volunteers. So through partners, increased performance of partners and a higher performing ecosystem, the social and economic well-being of poor and marginalized youth, particularly young women, will be improved by generating inclusive, remunerative, and sustainable employment and entrepreneurship opportunities. So what I would suggest now, if you like, is to pause the video here and think about what are some of the assumptions that would have gone into the planning of this project, and also think about what some of the inputs are. So take out that results-based management graphic and think about what some of the inputs to the project are. Then once you've done that, think about what are some of the project activities and outputs that you think would have been designed for the Ignite project based on what you have here, which is of course the immediate and intermediate and ultimate outcomes. And then when you're ready, come on back and we're going to discuss the Feminist International Assistance Policy and environmental sustainability, and then we'll get into talking about the project itself and your role within the project. Okay, so hopefully you took a few minutes there to think about logic models and to, go through all of the what you think would be the inputs, activities, outputs, and some of the higher level outcomes as a result of those inputs, activities, and outputs. And now we're going to change our focus a little bit and talk about some of the frameworks and policies that influence the project. So the first one we'll talk about is the Feminist International Assistance Policy, which is a key framework that informs both the Ignite project and also obviously informs global development as a whole through Global Affairs Canada. So the FIAP, or the Feminist International Assistance Policy, was launched in June 2017 by the Government of Canada. And the policy articulates the Government of Canada's vision for Canada's global development assistance. The objective of the policy is to contribute to global efforts to eradicate poverty by specifically addressing inequality and by supporting the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. So one of the biggest misconceptions about the Feminist International Assistance Policy, or the FIAP, is that it's just an add-on. So for example, we're used to having gender analysis sections or gender equality reporting sections in all of our proposals, plans, and reporting. But the FIAP is not just an added section in a proposal or a report. It is now the context for the entire proposal or the context for the entire report. It really sets out the criteria, the ambitions to be met, and the objectives to achieve. In fact, it is the entire context of Canada's global development efforts. It provides the lens through which we view our entire program as Ignite. That is with gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls as our approach to global development. So one of the key principles of the FIAP states that no less than 95% of Canada's bilateral global development assistance initiatives will target or integrate gender equality and the empowerment of women. And we're pleased that Ignite is one of those projects. So all of Canada's global development projects, including Ignite, must meet the following criteria. So it must have clear alignment with at least one of the 6 action areas of the FIAP, and those 6 action areas are gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls, human dignity, a feminist approach, growth that works for everyone, environmental and climate action, inclusive governance, and peace and security. And the two action areas that Ignite, our project, contributes to are Action Area 1, Gender Equality and the Empowerment of Women and Girls, and Action Area 2, which is Growth that Works for Everyone. Another key requirement is that key elements of gender equality analysis are undertaken. So an analysis of the gaps, the barriers, institutional capacity, inequalities in existing power structures. It requires that key measures are taken to advance gender equality in terms of our approach. It requires inclusion in terms of methods to foster participation of women and girls and/or the organizations and networks that defend their interests. And it also requires a minimum reach for the ultimate outcome. So in the case of Ignite, we've actually targeted 70% instead of 60%. So we anticipate we'll be able to exceed the required reach. Gendered social norms often constrain young women's ability to benefit from employment training and entrepreneurship programs, and can also restrict and guide their career choices. So gender analysis were conducted in all 6 Ignite project countries at the beginning of the project. And those analyses highlighted systemic and structural and relational barriers that are faced by women in terms of accessing inputs like capital, training, and supplies. For example, in some of the project countries, young women's access to training was significantly lower than men. And in others, although women's access to the training was similar or higher than men, it didn't actually translate to remunerative jobs at the same rate as men due to the lack of control over career choice. So facilitating the employment and empowerment of young women, which is the ultimate outcome of the project, really requires a multi-pronged approach to address the support and support young women's access to skills, opportunities, and knowledge, and supports their control over decisions related to career paths, work time, and also decisions over the use of income generated through employment, and also their ability to avail themselves of their rights. So tackling access, control, and rights really requires innovation, both in how partners engage their constituents, how they understand problems, how they design and deploy solutions, and how they really work together to drive systems change. And that's really our goal in Ignite. So we are aiming to achieve transformative systems change that goes beyond meeting women's practical needs and really focuses intentionally on meeting their strategic needs. Environmental sustainability and climate action is critical for sustainable development and covers issues such as climate change, biodiversity, pollution, water, and energy. Environmental sustainability and climate action are key priorities for GAC and for all volunteer cooperation programs, including Ignite. Ignite's primary contribution to climate change will unfortunately be the contribution of greenhouse gases emitted by the international flights and travel of volunteers and program staff. An analysis commissioned by WUSC in preparation for the project estimated that the flights would contribute over 9,000 tons of greenhouse gas emissions. WUSC intends to offset these emissions from travel with the support of Offsetters, Canada's largest climate offset firm, which has identified potential carbon offset investments in the countries in which Ignite operates. We also plan to support partner organizations to strengthen their capacities in environmental sustainability and climate action, which we'll discuss in the next few slides. So environmental sustainability and climate action are key priorities for WUSC, and therefore we've made environmental sustainability and climate action a cross-cutting theme throughout the Ignite program. All partners will participate in annual capacity assessments, which will include environmental sustainability and climate action standards of assessment. All partners will be assessed against these standards, even if they don't currently have any programming in this area. Ignite will provide program partners with an opportunity to learn more about the importance of including environmental sustainability and climate action theme as a cross-cutting theme in economic opportunities and gender equality programming, and will also give partners an opportunity to strengthen their capacities in this area, which could help partners to secure future funding in programs, since this isn't a challenge that's going anywhere. The climate crisis will be with us for a long time. Based on the needs identified in the annual capacity assessments, partners will get support from international volunteers with their needs as they're identified. So I wanted to give you a couple of practical examples of what this type of support could look like. One example might be a training institution might invest in campus greening activities with the support of international volunteers. A social enterprise incubator may invest in green technology, such as microsolar, that improves the lives of women while greening and reducing greenhouse gases. A business support service provider might be interested in supporting training in green value chain developments, for example. So if this is something that your organization has identified as a priority through the capacity assessments, there is support that you can ask for. You can request this from the country office through volunteer support or through other types of capacity training. All right, so now that you've had a bit of background on Canada's global development approach through results-based management, or RBM, the FIAP, the Feminist International Assistance Policy, and environmental sustainability and climate action and our approach to that, let's take a quick look at the logic model and the performance measurement framework for Ignite specifically. If you'd like, you can pause the video here and open up the copy of the logic model and PMF that your country office has provided so you can follow along. As you would have learned by now, WUSC through the Ignite project aims to take a systems approach to change. As such, Ignite specifically selected partner organizations and PAC members who are already working on the common problem of inequalities and barriers faced by vulnerable youth and young women on their journeys to gain meaningful and decent economic opportunities. Most partners and stakeholders are already contributing to solutions to this problem, usually individually through their own programming and sometimes jointly. The ultimate outcome of the project, as we learn through the results-based management module, is the highest level of change that a project can contribute to. And in the case of Ignite, volunteers and staff will work together with partners to contribute to the improved social and economic well-being of poor and marginalized youth, particularly young women, in the countries and communities that the project operates in. So all Ignite partners, like yourself, are already well poised to contribute to the ultimate outcome of the project. And WUSC volunteers and staff will support you to continue to do this through your individual programming, but also jointly through a systems approach. At the highest level, it is the project's theory that with the engagement of international volunteers, partners can be supported to improve the performance both individually and collectively, to be able to improve the social and economic well-being of poor and marginalized youth. So remember back to the results-based management approach, we said the ultimate outcome is a change of state or a change in being for, in this case, women and youth. The intermediate outcomes are behavior level change, performance of the partners, and engagement in global development of Canadian volunteers and the Canadian public. So let's take a closer look at the project's theory of change by doing a bit of a deeper dive in looking at who we're working with across the project in terms of partner organizations. So remember that Ignite's primary intervention to support partner performance improvements is capacity strengthening. Both organizational and technical capacity support through international volunteers is the primary mechanism. So although the ultimate outcome is a change in state or being for youth, particularly young women, our volunteers and staff don't work directly with the youth. Your organization works with the youth and women who are the ultimate outcome actors for the project. So we aim to strengthen partner capacities so that they can contribute to improving outcomes for youth, so that they can improve their programs and services for youth, such that ultimately youth can have improved livelihoods and well-being. And because we are using a systems approach, we're working with many different types of partners, including partners who have many different roles to play in improving youth outcomes: education and training, private sector, government regulators, incubators, accelerators, policymakers, media, financial services, women's rights organizations, employers, etc. They all also engage with youth at various points in their own employment and entrepreneurship journeys, which means that there's a great opportunity to infuse gender equality and environmental sustainability and climate action along the spectrum of support services. And that also means that by bringing these various partners together, we might be able to jointly solve problems that are caused by overlaps in this journey or gaps in this journey. So depending on the type of organization that you work for and your position within the organization, it might sometimes be hard to see how the work that you're doing contributes to the ultimate outcome, which is why it's so important to always keep the big picture in mind. Your organization is working with the volunteers and WUSC staff to strengthen your capacities and ultimately to improve the products and services that you provide to youth, particularly young women, which is your performance. This can contribute to the well-being and economic potential of youth. The capacity building that you are working on for your organization might be related to organizational capacities, things like IT, HR, comms, communications, finance, or it can be related to the programming side of your work: program design, gender integration and mainstreaming, environmental assessments, monitoring and evaluation of programs, etc. It's always important to keep this systems approach in mind. We selected a variety of partners so that we can better support outcomes for youth across a whole system, rather than focusing on strengthening one element of a system, for example, education or incubators. With a systems approach, all youth economic opportunity stakeholders can be supported to be gender transformative and environmentally sustainable, rather than just one sector, and we can address the organizational gaps and advocate and work together to address system level gaps.
Remember that horizontal logic model slide where we talked about the assumptions. And remember that behind all logic models are assumptions about how the if-then logic works, right? So for example, there can often be an assumption that behaviors will change simply as a result of an intervention. Take the example of the introduction of a certain technology. The assumption is that behaviors will change according to that technology, but we really have to break that down and think about the assumptions and whether they can actually influence the change that we anticipate occurring. So I'll use a very practical and relevant example to describe the assumptions. So let's take the example of introducing computers in schools. So there might be a theory, for example, that someone says if computers are introduced in classrooms, then the performance of students will increase. Well, that's a really big jump, right? That's a jump from an input, the computers, the technology, all the way down to, or all the way up to an intermediate outcome, right? The performance of students will increase, right? And then you could take from there maybe that the ultimate outcome would be they'll be better employed if we did a tracer study, for example, and track students after they leave the institution. So there's a lot of assumptions hidden in that huge jump from inputs to that intermediate outcome. So for example, what might some of the assumptions be? Well, there might be an assumption built in there that the teachers are qualified to teach using computers, that they don't need to go back and get training on using those computers. I think in this day and age, that's probably a fair assumption. But there might also be an assumption that the elements of the curriculum can be easily converted into electronic modules. Not such a great assumption, right? That may not be such an easy thing to do. And there even might be assumptions based on internet connectivity. So, certainly this would work in a place where there's high internet connectivity and a sustainable power supply, but maybe not in contexts where the internet is a little bit more unstable. So it's important to look at the hidden assumptions in project planning and that these are really acknowledged and even challenged before implementation. So the assumptions that underlie a program's theory often represent conditions that are necessary for success and that the project design team really believed are true. So sometimes to the extent that they didn't even question them in design phase. So it's always important to think about what are these assumptions that we've built into the project that we say, in order for the project to succeed, these assumptions have to be true. So what are some of the assumptions for the Ignite project? First, we have designed the project assuming that partners have programs or can design programs that can impact the social and economic well-being, so that the ultimate outcome of improved well-being for poor and marginalized youth can actually be achieved. Another assumption is that the sustainable changes can be achieved. So not just change, but change that can outlast the project, right? So sustainable outcomes. We've built the project on the assumption that volunteers are available for assignments. We've built the project on the assumption that volunteers are able to travel, right? Which in a COVID context may not actually be something that's possible. Certainly in the first year, that's proven to be difficult. We've also built it on the assumption that capacity buildings like group trainings will be allowable, which again, with group restrictions in place, may also not be something that's possible immediately. And we've also built it on the assumption that capacity buildings activities can be transitioned where necessary, and also that political and government contexts remain favorable for international volunteer cooperation. So these are the assumptions. They always have to be taken into account when we're not only doing our life of project planning, but also our annual planning to see if the outcomes that we have anticipated can still be achieved based on these assumptions. Okay, so this is a visualization that I put together in hopes of making the logic model a little bit simpler to visualize. So here on this slide, you're already an expert in results-based management by now, so you already know that we just have the results level here depicted on this slide. So at the top, we've got the ultimate outcome, in the middle is the intermediate outcomes, and at the bottom is the immediate outcomes. So it's key to remember that this is just the top half of the logic model. It doesn't tell us how we will implement the project, but rather what is the logic of the results, i.e. can this lead to that, or if this, then that. So if we look along the left side of the diagram, we've got outcome 1100, which will support partners to have improved capacity to analyze and understand the needs and aspirations of poor and marginalized youth, particularly women. The second one, we've got improved capacity to develop, test, and scale innovative gender-responsive programming for the equitable economic empowerment of vulnerable youth. And this outcome will ensure that partners have the knowledge, skills, and business models needed to pilot, scale, and innovate programs and services. And it really draws upon the contextual knowledge of and awareness gained through the previous outcome, which is about increased awareness. So in the third outcome is increased capacity to develop, improve, and implement inclusive gender-responsive policies and practices that reflect the needs, interests, and aspirations of vulnerable youth, particularly women. And this outcome ensures that partners have policies and structures in place to ensure sustainability of the changes that occurred in the previous two outcomes. So you can see there's also that horizontal logic built into the project. So depending on the type of partner organizations, partner staff will engage in capacity building activities supported by the Canadian Volunteers in order to increase their overall performance, partners' overall performance, and the ability to serve the ultimate outcome, which is their youth constituents. So depending again on the type of partner, they will either be serving their youth directly through improved programming or indirectly through advocacy campaigns, facilitation of change, of market system change. For the other side, the other intermediate outcome, which is about increased engagement of Canadians, our theory is that through improved understanding of key global development issues and the strengthened capacities, so knowledge and skills, of Canadians to contribute to global development efforts, this will result in increased and sustained engagement of Canadians in global development. So again, the changes in awareness, capacity to develop, test, and scale, develop, improve, and implement sustainable policies and practices. The theory is that these three outcomes on the left will lead to an increased performance of partners to deliver programs and services that will contribute to the ultimate outcome, which is improved social and economic well-being of youth. For volunteers, improved understanding of global development issues and strengthened capacity to contribute to global development issues will result in increased engagement of diverse groups of Canadians. And that is, the international volunteers contributing to global development who will contribute to the increased performance of partners and ultimately the improved social and economic well-being of poor and marginalized youth, particularly women. So that's the logic model in a nutshell, the top half anyway, the results half. And what we'll do in the next slide is really take a closer look at what we're going to do, which is implementation and how you'll contribute to that.
Now let's take a look at the bottom of the logic model, which is the outputs of our planned activities. If the logic works in practice, then the combined achievements of the outputs, which are the bullet points here, will contribute to the achievement of the immediate outcomes, which is the text in blue. Again, if the logic works in practice, the combined achievement of the immediate outcomes in blue will contribute to the achievement of the intermediate outcome, which is the outcome statement written in the left panel. Take outcome 1110 and use if-then statements. If partner organizations are supported to advance gender equality and inclusion of youth and women, and if partner staff are sensitized to gender equality and inclusion, and if women's organizations are supported to advocate for gender equality, inclusion, and women's economic empowerment, and if partners are supported to engage vulnerable youth as advocates, then the result for partners will be increased awareness of policies and practices that perpetuate gender-based inequalities and constrain access of youth to employment initiatives and services. And further, if awareness is increased, and the capacity to test, scale, and innovate is increased, and the capacity to develop, improve, and implement gender-responsive policies and practices is increased, then the result may be that partners' performance to deliver programs and services that advance gender equality is increased. It's important to remember here that the intermediate outcome does represent a behavior change, a change in the way that we do things, as opposed to these three immediate outcomes here in blue, which are an increase in knowledge, or represent an increase in knowledge and capacity to be able to do things differently, if you will. So there are some hidden assumptions in here between having the capacity to do things differently and then actually doing things differently. And that's something we need to work with each organization, with each partner on, and for you to seriously consider as a partner organization to think about these assumptions. As we get further and further up in the logic model, it's less and less about what the project can do in terms of an intervention, and it's much more about what the partners can do differently with the knowledge and capacity that they have gained. So some of the assumptions we've made here in order to plan for achieving improved performance across all partner organizations are: 1, that the project's capacity strengthening approaches will motivate partners to innovate or improve programs that will reduce barriers and meet the needs of vulnerable youth and women. 2, that the counterparts or partner staff who participate in capacity strengthening activities will apply knowledge, attitudes, and skills to the programs and policies that they create. And 3, that partners will apply lessons learned from other project stakeholders working in similar fields, which could be in-country or even learned globally from other project stakeholders, to their own initiatives and services. So it's really critical that partners consider the active role that they will need to take in terms of applying knowledge gained, those immediate outcomes, to the changes that they want to make in their organization to better meet the needs and aspirations of youth, and particularly women, which is the intermediate outcome of performance. The logic model and the PMF are key to understanding the big picture of the project. Although they are very text heavy, I do encourage you to go through them and work with the country manager or SPO at the WSC office to make sure that you have a good understanding of them. These two documents help us really to keep the end in mind in terms of what we're working towards. Remember, it's a plan. Improved social and economic well-being of poor and marginalized youth, particularly young women. Let's quickly look at the tool that we use to measure our activities, outputs, and some of those changes we've been discussing in the previous slides in the logic model, those higher level changes, immediate, intermediate, and ultimate outcome. And that tool is called the Performance Measurement Framework, or the PMF. This is a framework that helps us to guide the measurement of the project's activities and results. So in summary, a PMF serves two main purposes. 1, to support the effective management of the programs, and 2, to support accountability to community members by providing evidence of progress and change. PMFs can be used to focus on priority goals, to define criteria that will be used to measure success, to monitor progress towards goals, to identify opportunities for making improvements, and to report to community members, stakeholders, and donors about results achieved. The PMF is really a tool used in results-based management, or RBM, that presents us with an overview, and there's various sections in the PMF that talk about, of course, the expected outputs and outcomes, how to track and measure your progress through indicators, provides targets, baselines. It talks about what data sources you should use for verification or evidence, how you'll collect your data, at what frequency, and who is responsible for the data collection. So indicators is a word that you'll hear a lot in the project, especially around work planning time and reporting time. Indicators help us to measure performance against an outcome or an output. An indicator is a specific, observable, measurable characteristic that can be used to measure changes or progress in a program that project or program is making towards achieving a specific outcome. So it's important for us to consider how we know and how we can prove that there has been an improvement in the social and economic well-being of poor and marginalized youth, i.e. your constituents as partners. And what we've tried to do as you look through the PMF is provide at least 2 indicators for our higher level outcomes, and at least one, possibly 2 indicators for each output. So here's an example for us to think about how we use indicators. How do we know, and as I said, how can we prove that there has been improvement in the social and economic well-being of the youth that we support through the project? Sure, we can say that we worked hard to make this happen through building capacity building exercises, training, funding, etc. But how do we really know if we as a project and project partners have been successful? We need indicators to measure this success in the eyes of the youth and young women that are supported by partners. So we need to ask them, Are the programs that have been designed, the new programs or improved programs, meeting your needs? Have your employment levels increased? Do you feel empowered to participate in the design of new programs, etc.? Here's another example. How do we know if we've been successful in improving your capacities as partners in developing, testing, and scaling innovative programs? So if we were not using results-based management, for example, we could just say, well, we did this great training, and this many people attended, but in our view at WUSC, that's not enough. We need to set indicators that assess these improvements or changes from your perspective as a partner. We need indicators that will measure your capacities before and after the experience that relates to this change. And if during our implementation we find that we are not progressing toward an outcome, and then the results of our indicators the results of our measurement against our indicators should tell us that. We need to be able to learn from our data whether we are being successful or not, whether we are progressing, or whether we need to make a course correction. We share the responsibility for reporting on indicators as a project between our staff, our partner organizations like yourselves, and our volunteers. So your country office staff will be reaching out to you, or has already reached out to you, as partners to gauge your need in terms of M&E capacity to be able to report on performance progress and results, and also to get your support to be able to provide data on the project indicators. All right, so this wraps up the introductory overview to the Ignite project. If you'd like more information or you have questions, please do go ahead and reach out to the WUSC staff in your country to follow up. Welcome back, everyone. Thanks so much for taking the time to watch this overview of the Ignite project. If you have any other questions or you have any follow-up and you'd like to discuss it with your country manager, please do feel free to reach out. Thanks again for taking the time. Take good care. Bye-bye.